recycling arena, you have to look realistically at what additional recycling is going to require, what it's going to take. The current recycling center is functional for the amount of material that's coming in there now, but if you want to do any additional recycling or significantly increase it, it's just like any business situation. You need to make an investment, you know, in a facility with an operator, with equipment, and with land. Land is at a premium in Juneau, so you have some basic dilemmas. We're looking at other activities down the road that could go on at this facility, potentially, to increase the amount of recycling or diversion from the landfill. They're listed here, but our initial focus is on the recycling. Once you've dedicated land and a facility, then you can plan for the long term. Without that essential piece in place, you really have nowhere to go. On the disposal side, the basic options, probably most of you are aware of, that we looked at, to continue to use the landfill since it has a 30-year capacity, which is, despite what some people may think, is a very fortunate situation to be in. There are a lot of communities that don't have that kind of resource available. Kodiak Island, where we're also working as a prime example, it's about 4 to 6 years left, so they have a real problem that they have to deal with. Every situation is different. A new incinerator, a new landfill, you need land, acreage, substantial acreage, for those facilities, and the costs, the permitting, the engineering work, the time frames involved are all fairly extensive and fairly lengthy. You could barge your garbage down to a landfill in Washington or Oregon. As we're going to show shortly, that's also fairly expensive. You'd have to have an offloading terminal here in Juneau. You'd have to purchase containers. You would be subject to fluctuations in fuel prices, which you have no control over, obviously. Southeast Conference, there are representatives here from the Southeast Conference who we've met with and talked to. We've read what I think are the latest reports from the Southeast Conference, and we've come to certain conclusions about that as well, which we can discuss. We don't see a viable alternative at this point in time for disposal anyway for Juneau through the Southeast Conference. There is a role Juneau could play in the Southeast Conference, which we'll get to shortly. When we're talking about disposal, let's keep in mind we're talking about the 24,000 tons a year of regular garbage. The construction demolition debris is always going to be landfilled, or at least a certain portion of it, because most of it can't be burned. It's too heavy and too expensive to barge. And so the landfill is still going to serve a function here under any scenario that you look at. Even if you had an incinerator, the ash would still be sent to the landfill here. So there will be a landfill in your future. Is this where you, I can't remember where you came in, but.
That's after this one.
Yeah. And I want to say there's a fair amount of detailed analysis we've provided to the borough. It is available online, where Maria can provide, you know, with future or additional resources or references on how we came up with these costs. The easiest way to portray them is what is the cost per ton versus what you're paying now. And as you can see for the disposal part, the cost per ton we've calculated in current dollars for all the three other options is higher than what you're paying now at the waste management disposal site. It's important to emphasize these costs have assumptions to them. There's no way that we can predict what it's going to actually cost you to build an incinerator 5, 10 years down the road. These are modeled costs that give you sort of an idea of what the comparative costs could be. They aren't the precise cost that somebody's going to charge you at an incinerator or a new landfill down the road. Our main conclusions. There's a strong disconnect, or what we call a disconnect, between what a lot of folks in the borough seem to want to do with solid waste and recycling and the borough's ability to actually affect or implement anything. That disconnect is due to the Regulatory Commission of Alaska situation and the fact that the borough has no contracts. If it had contracts, you can put terms and conditions in contracts through which you can implement public policy. if the borough wants to follow those public policy objectives, it needs to have a stronger role. We don't think that the borough has the resources, or the community as a whole has the resources to pursue recycling aggressively at the same time you look at siting a new incinerator or a new landfill. And siting a new landfill or incinerator or barging are all costly, long-term, complicated processes. If your landfill only had a year, 2, 3, 4 years of life left, you'd be in a totally different situation. You're not in that situation. We don't see, and we've talked to the state, which is the regulatory agency that controls what happens at the landfill from a regulatory point of view. The landfill's in compliance. So again, from a technical point of view, not a political or personal or cultural point of view, from a technical point of view, there's no reason not to continue to use the landfill for disposal. If you had a really strong, comprehensive recycling program, that would factor into our perspective also, but the fact of the matter is you don't. You have a strong commitment to recycling and the beginning of a program, but in terms of its actual impact on the overall waste is pretty limited right now. So you're kind of at that fork in the road, in essence. What are we recommending? It's basically a 5-year, maybe a 7-year strategy. You could continue doing exactly what you're doing now. Your basic needs are being met in terms of garbage. It's being picked up, it's being disposed in a manner that's compliant with the regulations. There is a recycling opportunity, and you have some contracts in place to address some of the other waste streams like the household hazardous waste. That's fine, as long as your expectations or priorities don't exceed what your current system can provide, you're consistent. The problem we have right now, at least that we see, is that the expectations are way up here and the actual resources are way over here, and they're pretty far apart from each other. So we're saying continue to use the landfill, focus on the recycling portion. You need to hire a professional solid waste coordinator who knows what they're doing, because that expertise doesn't exist in the borough. Everybody needs to participate in the garbage system, all businesses, all residents. Everybody needs to have a standard level of service and pay. That way there's more equity, it's fairer. Right now you have some people that are not paying for service that are benefiting from the fact that others are. The RCA certificate needs to be transferred from Aero Refuse to the borough. Subsequent to that, the borough can establish contracts with Aero Refuse and with Waste Management in which these priorities, recycling, control over what's happening at the landfill, a more efficient garbage collection service can be met. Without that key step, we don't feel you can really move ahead, at least to fulfill the priorities we've heard. You need to secure a site for the recycling facility that we were talking about. The obvious site is at the landfill. Commercial land, developable land in Juneau is at a premium, and it's heavily competed for. You have to set that land aside forever, basically, and remove it as a developable piece of property. You'd need 10 acres plus 10 acres beyond that to account for some of the operations we have in mind, or that we're recommending that you consider. So we're also looking, how do you fast track this? Waste Management has the property, they have the expertise in running recycling operations, they have equipment that could be utilized, and they're an interested partner. And I'm not trying to advertise Waste Management, I'm just saying they're a resource that is tremendously underutilized here. And the same would go true for your refuse company, Aero Refuse. At this point, Chris is going to come in